as I understand it, there's nothing new in here. We're bringing forward code sections, and you're telling me, I mean, there's a lot that could be done with these code sections.
Yes, sir.
But you're telling me that all this is for and all you see this
Yes.
bill being used for is what
Back up.
the legislative special elections that could happen this year and nothing else. Is that right?
Yes, sir. That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions for Senator Tate? Okay, seeing none, do I have a motion? Motion is title sufficient, do pass. All in favor, please say aye. All opposed, no. All right, the ayes have it. That bill will be reported out. Senate Bill number 2654 is a bill that we had last year that we passed on our floor. It's exactly the same form that allows for in-person early voting in Mississippi. It will do away with the 45-day absentee in-person absentee voting process, but it will add a 15-day for in-person early voting. What it allows for you to do is to show up at your circuit clerk's office with a valid photo ID, have a ballot printed for you, and cast that ballot up to 15 days prior to the election. As of course, there will not be Sundays, will not be included in this. We just say 15 days because it's calendar days, but you will have those half days on Saturdays like you do now to vote in-person absentee. Again, it's the exact same bill we had last year. I'm happy to take any questions. Senator Bryan.
I'm confused. How does this change existing practice other than to go from 45 days to 15 days?
Because currently with in-person absentee voting, we don't have early voting, quote unquote, in Mississippi now. We have in-person absentee voting where you have to have an excuse in order to vote in-person absentee. We're getting rid of that process here. You still have in-person, or you will still have mail-in absentee. So this is basically shortening the whole process, and you don't have to have an excuse for this. And I will say that this past election, when we saw a lot of coverage on this issue, folks showing up and voting early across all demographics, we had people in Mississippi showing up at their clerk's offices saying, hey, we're here to vote early. And they were told, well, we don't have that in Mississippi. A lot of these individuals would have met the age requirement, and they could have been told, you know, you can vote in-person absentee. But now, being one of only 3 states that don't have any form of early voting, many Mississippians are starting to get confused by that, even with so many other folks doing that. I don't know if I answered your question. I probably answered it in a roundabout way, but the primary difference is that you don't have to have an excuse if you show up in these 15 days with a valid photo ID and cast your ballot.
And the only place you could vote is in the circuit clerk's office.
That's correct, which is the same currently for the current system we have, which is in-person absentee. You have to do that at your clerk's office. So there's really just no change there. Yes, you would vote in person early at your clerk's office.
So I'm guessing there are 2 judicial districts in Harrison County, and there's a circuit clerk's office in each judicial district.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm guessing in Harrison County, you could vote, and I'm assuming the clerk's office in Gulfport and the clerk's office in Biloxi. And those would be the only 2 places in Harrison County that anyone could vote early.
That's correct.
And you're increasing the number of people who are eligible to do this and restricting the number of days to 15. Aren't there going to be fairly long lines down at the clerk's office?
There may be, but I can tell you after speaking with many of the clerks, including my own in Jackson County, the lines are long for 45 days currently. And he said that this would actually be a better system, he believes, if they have long lines for 15 days. So we are seeing long lines at these offices, but we also have an election support fund where other individuals can be hired to come in and help. So I think this would actually, even if there are long lines, it's going to be an easier process for voters and for the clerk's offices.
Your clerk tells you, right now we have so many people coming to the clerk's office to vote that we have long lines for 45 days.
I'm not sure.
My
if that was-
solution for the long lines of 45 days is to reduce 45 to 15 and increase the number of people who can participate, and that would be an improvement.
Senator Brown, I understand what you're saying. I think what the point my clerk was making is that he currently has to be ready and prepared for potential long lines for 45 days and have that staffing and that part of his office available. But 15 days would be a much easier process.
It might be easier for the clerk. It ain't easier for the poor soul that's trying to vote.
Understand?
I mean, assuming you want to do this, there's no reason on earth to couple it with reducing from 45 days to 15. I mean, the problem that we have now is the reasons to vote absentee are so great that for all practical purposes, it encourages fraud.
That's correct.
And so, given that we are where we are, we might as well have this, whatever we're doing, available for everybody, because we're long past when we ever had absentee voting the way it was in the previous century, when it was to take care of a handful of people who just couldn't get to the polls on election day. But since we're in this world, it seems to me a very strange type of early voting. And we haven't even begun to deal with the issue that the only place you can vote is at the clerk's office. So this gives a political advantage to voters who reside close to the clerk's office and a disadvantage to those who are in the areas farthest away from the clerk's office. And some of our counties in Mississippi are fairly large.
No, I agree. We have large counties. The current system we have also requires travel to the clerk's office. So I understand what you're saying, Senator Bryan. I do. We had a hearing on this past summer on this. Matter of fact, it was a House committee that they invited us to because, as you know, we passed this bill 44-8 in the Senate last year after passing it out of this committee.
You act as though that's an argument in favor of the legislation, but keep
it seems pretty strong to me, Senator Bryan. But this is something that will help Mississippians vote. It will prevent fraud, as you mentioned. There will be no more requirement or no more incentive to walk in and wink and nod at your clerk and say, hey, I'm not going to be here that day, and vote early, and then have to put that into an envelope that's going to be potentially looked at by someone else. I understand that this may not go as far as some other states do, but it certainly is a good thing for Mississippians for us to look at.
It's not so far that it goes farther or less far than other states do. I'm not really in favor of all this absentee voting. I'm left over from when, generally speaking, if you wanted to vote, you went down to the polls and voted. But it's like so many things, there's all this progress and there doesn't seem to be anything that can be done about it. But since we're in the world that we're in, one of the things that it would seem to me everybody would be concerned about are extraordinarily long lines. They discourage people from voting. It also seems to me one of the things we'd be concerned about is the inaccessibility of the clerk's office. And when we were in a world where relatively few people did this, the fact that you had to get to the clerk's office somehow wasn't that big a deal because, relatively speaking, fewer people even qualified for that in the first place. But now that we have large numbers of people who are doing this, and we're going to have more, at the same time, you're making sure the lines are longer, and the disproportionate value that it gives to voters who are close to the clerk's office rather than the distant from the clerk's office is exacerbated. And none of those things have anything to do with philosophy or anything. It's just things that are unworkable and unnecessary.
Thank you, Senator Bryan. Any other questions? Yes, Senator Blunt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to make sure I understand what the impact is on the current absentee procedures that we have. And I think I understand the intent of the bill is if you are not currently eligible to vote absentee, whether in person or in the mail, under this bill, you will now have 15 days to show up in the clerk's office, show your ID and vote.
That's
Right,
correct.
right now, you can't do that.
Right now, you can't do that.
Is there any impact on a person and the period of time? Right now, you can vote if you're eligible, in person 45 days out, if you meet the criteria laid out in the law.
That's correct.
What happens to those people, or is that unchanged?
Yes, so you won't be able to show up in person and vote absentee, even if you meet one of the criteria. With this bill, you will have the 15 days to show up and cast your ballot. Now, I would say that this process should be quicker than having to fill out an affidavit on an envelope, having it notarized, marking the ballot, having a clerk help you with making sure your ballot is properly entered and then signed across a flap, in all of that process. Instead of that, they will have, and again, one of the reasons why we're doing this in the clerk's office is it's already a secure and good location where this is going on now. You would get your ballot printed, mark your ballot and put it in the machine. The
Right.
machine will tell you if your ballot's properly marked or not. And then another concern I heard from Mississippians was whether they go to church where somebody's going to open that envelope and they're trusting them not to turn around and look at who
Right.
they voted for. So this will allow more voter, I would say voter confidence in that process.
So for those people, they are losing the right to vote absentee in person from day 45 to 15. And then from day 15 to day 1, everybody's treated the same and they vote on the machine.
That's correct.
If you are going to be out of town in that 15-day period, or if you are a registered voter and you're temporarily residing outside the state, you can vote absentee by mail and you can get that ballot. You're supposed to get that ballot 45 days before the election, and you've got time to mail it in. That's a whole nother process, which is terrible, but we can talk about that another time. That's another debate.
That's correct.
Is the process for those people who are residing outside of the state or who will be out of town on election day, is that the same under this bill as it is under current law?
Yes, with regard to mail-in options.
All the mail stuff is exactly the same. You can get your ballot because you can't turn this around in 15 days. So you can get your absentee ballot. Hopefully, if you ask for it immediately, mail it to you 45 days out. Same eligibility requirements. All that stuff is the same. No one loses anything. We're not increasing voting by mail in any way. We're just keeping all the mail stuff the same.
That's correct.
Okay. So the only people that would be affected by this is the folks who are currently eligible to vote absentee in person in the courthouse who live in the state from day 45 to day 15, but they're voting on the machine and everything's the same, day 15 to 1.
That's correct.
Okay, great. Thank you for making that clear to me.
Absolutely. Thank you, Senator Blunt, for your questions. Any other questions? Senator Tate?
Is there any funding with this bill?
There's no specific funding with this bill, but of course, with it being elections, the election support fund would be available to assist with
And
this.
Your circuit clerk, Jackson County, Mr. Randy, he's good with this.
He is, yes.
Okay, have you talked with any other circuit clerks to see if they're okay with it?
I have. I've talked to many of them. They don't have this as a part of their agenda on this, and I do have a bill here that will hopefully go a little quicker for the circuit clerks that they've requested, but the circuit clerks that I've talked to are okay with this. There was some
Majority of
hesitancy with regard to it just being a new process. Again, Jackson County, I've talked with Madison County, Rankin County,
Those are
DeSoto
some big
County.
counties that can afford this. Have you talked to any smaller counties?
I have discussed this with smaller counties and with their association, through their own association and their representation
They're all
within
good
that
with it.
association. They do not oppose the bill, yes. I don't want to say they're good for it and they come back and say we never said that. I do know they're not against the bill.
Okay.
Yes, thank you, Senator Tate. Any other questions? Yes, Senator Philligain.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is sort of related. It may not be directly on point, but I'm just wondering when we're doing these kinds of bills, is there any way to encourage on election cycles, the clerks to go ahead and process and count all of the absentee ballots before the actual election day? Because I know sometimes on election night, everyone's nervous and want to know the outcomes and this and that and the other, and then you have to wait sometimes through, and I know there's a certain amount of
Mhm.
time you have to wait for people to show up to present their voter identification if they didn't bring it with them and did the affidavit ballot. So I know there's that period of time, but in most cases, the difference between the person ahead and the person behind in the race is so small, that, or rather, the number of people that didn't bring their voter ID is so small that in most cases it's not going to affect the outcome. If you had all the other absentee ballots processed and counted, say on the Monday, after the period ends on Saturday, and so going into election day and night, you already had all those votes counted. So then election night, all you have to count are the votes that day. It looks like in most instances by election night at some period in time, we would have a pretty solid understanding of who won and who lost, with the one exception being if it was so infinitesimally small, the gap,
Mhm.
that, the people that didn't show up with their voter ID who might come 5 days from now, it might change the outcome. But otherwise, you would basically know 99.9% of the time who the winner and who the losers were, as opposed to this current state of affairs where sometimes it's a week or 10 days or whatever before it seems like we ever get a final result. And I know for me as a candidate, oftentimes that's very frustrating, but I'm sure for the voters out there, it's also very frustrating not knowing who their elected person is going to be. So I'm just curious, as we go through these various bills, if there's an opportunity to encourage or require even people to go ahead and count those votes that can be counted before election day, that then you could have a better understanding of the winners and losers sooner in time.
Absolutely. And Senator Fillingane, that's a very good issue that you bring up, and it's a very good question. I'll say that the process that we have here, when you cast these ballots into the voting machine, you're going to get these in-person early votes counted that night. That machine is going to tabulate that night. But with regard to your question, I think that's something we should look into. And after being named chairman of this position and looking into this and talking with a lot of nice people from across the nation, I understand Florida has an issue or has a law that allows their absentee ballots to go ahead and be certified so that it's easier to count. So they knock off part of the process. So there are definitely things we can look at, and I'd certainly like to work with you in doing that. Thank you, Senator Fillingane. Yes, Senator Blunt?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to clarify, I think you're exactly right that when you don't have these absentee ballots that have an affidavit that are in an envelope that have to be checked whether you signed across the flap and all that nonsense, you have a ballot that's been cast that can be run through the machine that night. It is really going to speed things up. However, I think I'm right about this. No ballots are going to be counted before the polls closed.
That's correct.
But on Tuesday night, they'll be counted much more quickly, and you'll have many fewer ballots that have to have in the envelope open, all the rest of it. But no ballots are going to be counted, and nobody's going to know who voted for anybody until after 7 o'clock on Tuesday night, and then they can run them all through, the early votes all the way through.
That's correct. Yes, thank you, Senator Blunt.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Senator Bryan?
Again, just thinking through the mechanics of this, it dawns on me that it's obvious that there is one machine at the clerk's office which can process ballots for all the races in all the county. That the issue of if you got the right ballot for the right precinct and all of that is resolved when the voters handed the ballot in the first place. But the machine can count ballots all over the place.
That's correct.
And so every machine in the county can count ballots all over the place. It's possible to program every single machine to do the same thing.
It's possible, yes.
And I just, since that has dawned on me, and since we're in this new world, which Mr. Chairman, this progress was okay for a while, but it's just gone on long enough. But at any rate, I wonder if we should reconsider what to do about voters who present themselves at the wrong precinct. If in fact I'm at the wrong precinct, but I'm a registered voter and that can be determined, why shouldn't I be able to get a ballot and cast it at that precinct rather than having to drive to another precinct? I know that's not that's not the bill that's before us, but this did dawn on me while I was trying to imagine what would happen on election night and election day.
Senator Bryan, you're definitely one to discuss this with as we go forward, and I think there are certainly some things we can do to make things work better for our voters in Mississippi, and I'd be glad to look at that with you as well. Are there any other questions on this bill? Seeing none, do I have a motion? Motion is title sufficient to pass. All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed, no.
No.
The ayes have it. That bill will be reported. I'm going to skip to a bill. I'm going to skip the next bill in the interest of time. We may come back to it. Before we get out of here, I just want to see how quick we can get to this next bill, which is Senate Bill 2657. It simply allows for our elections commissioners, allows our counties the discretion to pay elections commissioners the same amount that poll workers make on election day. Because currently we passed recently a pay raise for poll workers to encourage that. They're now making more than our elections commissioners, but this gives the county discretion to pay their elections commissioners the same amount as poll workers. So that's all the bill does. Are there any questions on the bill? Senator Bryan?
Before we get to this bill on the floor, could you arrange for someone to provide us a list of the total amount of compensation election commissioners in the various counties could get?
I certainly will. I'll reach out to them this afternoon to get that for us. Certainly.
Okay.
Thank you, Senator Bryan. Any other questions? Seeing none, I would move title sufficient to pass. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, no. All right, that bill will be reported out. The next bill, 2659, it's a simple change to qualification deadlines for just for county elections, which would be special elections and school board elections. It moves the time frame, I think 15 days, but the purpose of this is to allow circuit clerks more time to prepare the ballots. The time frames for qualifying and for all of that, they are the same. This just allows for more time to get the ballots prepared. That's a very simple explanation of the bill. Any questions? Seeing none, I move title sufficient to pass. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, no. All right, that bill will be reported out. Let me jump back up very quickly to Senate Bill 2656, United States congressional primaries moved to take place in March. This is something that I have talked with all four of our U.S. congressional offices. They are looking to have their primary at the same time every year. You know, these guys have to run every 2 years, which has got to be tough. And having a primary in March and then moving it to a different time, they've asked that we just make it consistently in March. Again, all four of our U.S. congressmen are in favor of this, and that's what this bill does. I do have a committee sub, though, now that I remember, and I'm going to ask, I tell you what, I'm going to ask that we table this motion after I've talked about it, because we did have a late committee sub. We are going to meet again, and I'm to be fair to my Judd A chairman on the side of the room over here that also has a meeting at this time. If you all will just bear with me, we're going to have several more bills that I want to call up, but my motion at this time is to table Bill 2656, subject to call of the chair. All in favor, say aye. Any opposed, no. Thank you very much. Okay, and before we rise and report again, we will be meeting again. We have a lot of important bills, and if you see any that are important to you, talk to me before. It will probably be next Tuesday when we're all scrambling around this room, so wear good shoes that day. And your one final thing, your election finance reports are due tomorrow. I didn't announce that on the floor today, but I'll at least announce it to my committee. Thank you. Motion to rise and report. Thank you, Senator Tate.